there is no better name in Australian motor racing than, of course, Mark Skaife. And Mark's been a great friend of the program. His record is quite incredible when you think of what he's achieved in his time behind the wheel in Australia, as well as some interesting results overseas. But his accomplishments, I guess, in Australia focus very much on V8s and, of course, the road-going side of things with the motor vehicle industry. Mark's record, though, is impressive. He's equalled the best touring car titles. He's had 5 Bathurst wins, 3 Australian Drivers' Championships, just to name a few. He's written a book along with Andrew Clark called Skaifey, Life in the Fast Lane. And to talk a little bit more about that, he joins me on the line now. How are you, Skaifey?
I'm very well, thanks, Russell.
Mate, great to speak to you. Thanks for your time. And always good to put things on paper, I guess, and looking at this book that chronicles your not only your racing career, but also your business career. It's a good read.
Oh, mate, it was one of those ones. I've sort of worked on it basically since I did the full-time retirement from racing, and it's sort of 18 months of sort of trying to get a little bit of the inner sanctum of motorsport across without having to be necessarily a petrolhead, and that's always hard, Russell, because if you know yourself, when you're heavily involved in the industry, you don't know where that line is of where people would understand or not. And what I've tried to do is make it reasonably conversational, and as I said, not too much of a train spotter to know what's going on from a sporting standpoint.
And Skaifey, I suppose too, as you say, you've written in such a way that it gives gives people a perspective of what often happens behind the scenes. And I guess, was that easier to do with that magic of perspective when you are, as you say, not in the fishbowl of the industry itself?
Yeah, exactly. And I think always, it's the written word's quite powerful. I mean, if you sort of say something, you can be a little bit more laconic and a little bit, more laid back when it's just a verbiage, and when you say certain things and put them down on paper, especially when you're in the industry still, that some of those things are quite hard. You don't really know. How hard you should go with some items. So, being out of the sport full time and being able to have a think about that gave me a little reprieve and a little period of time where I could sort of get my brain into how much we wanted to tell and, what sort of information we were going to divulge.
Which is always a challenge with writing books, is what you leave out more so than what you put in.
Exactly.
Mark, when I was reading the book, I got a sense that you were sort of trying to let people know that there was often a lot of conflict going on sort of behind the scenes, and sometimes I guess that made life interesting when you're trying to drive a race car as well, and sometimes that, I guess, led to people maybe misunderstanding what Mark Skaife was all about. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've been around, together and done functions and stuff, and I think, when people get to know you is a lot different in terms of what the motorsport face is versus what the normal sort of everyday face might be. And when you've in the middle of your career, or you're busy trying to win races and run race teams and do things, sometimes it's difficult to spend the right amount of time with the public and do the right things in terms of even just the fan base and stuff. So there's a consequence. I mean, sometimes people may have seen me as a bit a bit intense or whatever, and I've tried to sort of balance that off a little bit to put some explanation behind some of it.
One of the things I found interesting looking at the book was just how it did trace through your career, right from, I guess, the side of things where Fred Gibson, obviously you had a very close relationship with him when you first started racing the Nissan Gazelle, and then tracing your racing history all the way through. And I think the thing that was very intriguing for me was the benefit that you thought you found from being under the wing of someone like Fred, but also Jim Richards at the same time with Nissan. Oh,
look, no doubt. I think, I don't really like the words mentor, but and the way that, we currently use them so much, there's a mentor for everything, but they were two guys that had a very serious impact on a lot of what shaped my driving, but also the way I approached it. And Jim Richards and I are 20 years apart in terms of age, but we could be brothers, in terms of how well we got on. And it was one of those things that, that's quite unusual as teammates, to have relationships like that. And his level of honesty, his ability to, read situations, and his overall sort of method of operation, I learnt a lot from. And he was, and Fred obviously is the same, but from a driving standpoint and probably then from a team standpoint, Fred Gibson was very powerful in my career.
The other thing I thought was interesting, and when this car first arrived, the Nissan GTR, everyone sort of said, oh, you know, it's just going to be so dominant, it's an easy thing to drive. But you outlined in the book that it was a pretty hard beast to tame.
Oh, it was a very, very hard car to drive because compared to today, it wouldn't have had any aerodynamic downforce. It probably had lift. We didn't even measure it in those days because it was so crude. But the car was, it was high off the ground. It didn't have any. It was a big, heavy car, about 1,500 kilos in the end without driver or fuel. So, you know, it was quite a heavy car. Small tyres, you know, an inch narrower than our current tyres on a V8 Supercar with no downforce, but 650 horsepower. And when the car would get away from you, it was a very hard car to regather control of. And, you know, we saw it over the years. You know, people used to say, you know, this four-wheel drive thing is just, you know, it's an easy car to drive. In the slow corners, it was pretty easy to drive because the traction with being four-wheel drive was great. But as a fast car in, you know, fast sections of road, it was a real handful.
And mate, the other thing I didn't realise, when you had that crash at the Adelaide Grand Prix meeting that year, I didn't realise that particular thing knocked you around quite so much. I mean, it was a big crash, but you sort of detailed there was a little bit more than just the incident itself. There was some ongoing effects there too, wasn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it turned over on its roof and squashed, you know, my back down, it popped the disc in my lower back, and also when it hit the fence, it was pretty wild, and it ended up, it damaged my eye. It scarred the retina with everything moving around so hard. So yeah, there were lingering things that, you know, often people don't really think about. You know, if you're injured playing footy, then, you know, you sort of fix the injury and you come back or whatever it is. But some of those injuries, you know, as you see older footballers afterwards, you know, they're still knocked around, their knees are knocked around or their shoulders knocked around or whatever, and that's sort of a similar thing to how that incident, you know, affected me throughout my career.
Yeah. And Mark, obviously, you know, you've had such great success, not only with Nissan, of course, but, you know, we all know you from most recently, of course, with everything that you did with Holden and the Holden racing team and that success. And I think that's the other interesting thing with the book. It sort of chronicles, you know, putting that magical mix together of the right technical expertise, but the funding was also another major part of having the right infrastructure around you. And, of course, your relationship with John Crennan also was, not only was critical, but still is, I guess.
Oh, look, it certainly was. I mean, John, you know, I come to drive for John at the end of 1996, and it was basically when I joined the team in '97 with Brock. It was a major step in my career, you know, for me to have been with Gibson Motorsport for the period of time of the previous 10 years, and then go to Holden and go to Crenno's operation was a very big step for me, and he was, you know, in terms of the way he went about the motor racing business, he was certainly the lead guy in the country, and I learned a massive amount from him, and, you know, we're still good friends. In fact, we're in the same offices together, and you know, I see John basically every day, so you know, we've stayed in close contact.
Now, mate, I know you keep yourself incredibly busy, you know, obviously, certainly in recent years, but is it still hard, you know, retirement? Is it, you know, we know that you're obviously going to do some endurance racing and all that sort of stuff as well, but do you still get the itchy right foot when you hear the starting siren? Yeah,
look, I think that's one of those things, Russell. It's sort of almost, you know, innate. It's the competition part of it is the thing that I miss the most. You know, the week in, week out, you know, grind of trying to beat, you know, Craig Lowndes or Russell Engel or whoever it is. It was certainly a big part of your life, and fortunately, I mean, motor racing is a bit weird, isn't it? You can actually come back and do these races. No other sport would allow you to come and, you know, basically play at the grand final after you've retired full-time participation. So, you know, I'm enjoying the couple of runs that I have with Craig Lowndes.
Mate, I've got to ask one final question, because there are some great photos in the centre part of the book as well. And I've got to ask you, do you think that the dragster push bike you had with the T-bar gear shift, did that help you with your racing career?
How about the big sissy bar on the back of it?
It was a cracker. But I can relate to it. Mate, it was nearly like the same one I had. I thought, Skaifey and I got something in common.
Well, it was funny. I was doing a radio show the other day with Eddie Maguire, and he said I had exactly the same, but my sissy bar wasn't as high. I only had a 3/4 sissy bar. So yeah, don't you worry, Russell. We all had those.
Well, of course, the book is called Skaifey, Life in the Fast Lane. It's published by Random House. It's available in all good bookshops at the moment. And Mark Skaife, always a pleasure to talk to you, mate, and thanks for joining me on Motor Talk.
Thanks, Russell. See you, mate.